The Earth could now be in its warmest period since records began some 150 years ago. That's according to forecasts by the Met Office. Climate scientists say we could start to see weather events on a scale we've never experienced before. The report also says there's a risk that global temperatures could rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels, a tipping point after which there could be rapid and far-reaching changes for our planet. Here's our science correspondent, Rebecca Morrell.
From the devastating flooding that's inundating Australia, forcing thousands from their homes, to the deadly forest fires that raged across the United States last year, and the record-breaking temperatures seen here and across Europe over the summer. It's been a year of extremes, and now scientists warn there could be more to come.
The long-term climate projections say...
At the Met Office, researchers have been tracking global temperatures, and their new forecast suggests we could be in the middle of the warmest decade since records began.
This is worrying because this is a new level of temperature extreme, and the regional impacts of that are likely to be unprecedented in some regions. So we are likely to see things that we have not seen in over the 100 years of observational records.
A temperature rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels is set as a threshold by UN scientists. Anything more could lead to dangerous global impacts. Have a look at this graph. The red area shows the predictions the Met Office has made over the years, and the black lines show the actual temperatures they recorded. There's a close match. The last 4 years were the hottest on record. This blue area is their forecast for the next 5 years. It suggests the warming trend will continue, with a small chance temperatures could temporarily exceed 1.5 degrees. The main driver for all this is the greenhouse gas emissions we're producing. We're still too reliant on fossil fuels like coal, and globally, levels of carbon dioxide are at a record high.
We've got to reduce our emissions of greenhouse gases. We've got to reduce the concentrations, because if we don't, we are looking at really big changes in the climate. We're going into territory that we have never been in before. We haven't experienced this, so we don't know precisely what's going to happen.
All eyes will now be watching to see if this forecast plays out. Scientists warn that the time to act is running out fast. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
The shale gas company Cuadrilla is asking for the regulations on earth tremors to be relaxed so its test well at Preston New Road in Lancashire can become commercially viable. The firm has been analysing data gathered since it started fracking there in October.
Breaching the current limit, 0.5 on the Richter scale, resulted in its operations stopping several times. But opponents say the rules are there for a good reason, and there is no reason to change them. Let's go live to Eunice Muller then. He's at Preston New Road, outside that fracking site for us tonight. Preston, Eunice.
Cuadrilla is currently the only company in the UK which is fracking, and that at this site here on Preston New Road in Lancashire, but it's been moving equipment away, raising questions over what plans it had for the future. Well, today it revealed what it's found here initially, but also what it's asking for.
From the air, little sign of activity. But beneath this exploration site at Little Plumpton, there lies what Cuadrilla calls a rich reservoir of recoverable high-quality natural gas. But that assessment is based only on partial testing. It's only frac 2 of 42 planned stages because of rules around tremors. They've constrained its operations. Going forward, it wants an urgent review of those rules. Campaigners say any adjustments will be damaging.
Well, to be honest, I'm quite appalled by the very suggestion, that the industry wanted the gold standard regulations set in. They wanted to get this industry off the ground. They set those regulations, and now at the first sign of trouble, they want to change it.
Under current rules, if a tremor exceeds a limit of 0.5 on the Richter scale, the company has to cease operations. It's done that numerous times. Today, Cuadrilla suggested research says that limit could be raised to 1.5, and that would not pose significant extra risk. To put that in context, a 1.0 increase means a tremor is 10 times as big. In the United States, the threshold is 4.0, over 3,000 times higher.
We need jobs up here, we need investment up here. If this isn't raised this level and it isn't a viable production technique, let's say, because the level's too low, then I just think it's an absolute shame and it's a complete missed opportunity.
The Oil and Gas Authority has confirmed there are no plans to review the traffic light system, and the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy hasn't responded to our request for a comment.
Any change would effectively set a precedent and affect future sites such as Quadrilla's interest here in Rossiter.
Quadrilla says it's committed to Preston New Road, subject to the outcome of a review.
Because this is our third winter here, and so long as they're here, we're going to be here.
I know I've spoken personally to people who said to me, who've never been involved with the campaign directly, they said, you know, if they were to raise the limits and put my only asset under threat, that they would come and join us.
Questions remain over how much shale gas Quadrilla will be able to extract. But the plan, it says, is to resume full operations later this year. Eunice Muller, BBC Northwest Tonight, Little Plumpton.
Well, in recent days, we had Sir John Ratcliffe, the boss of energy firm INEOS, which has licences in Cheshire and also Greater Manchester, warning that the government was trying to shut the industry down through the back door. And now today we have Quadrilla at a pivotal moment for the industry, calling for changes, a sign of nervousness.
Eunice, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, Jim Ratcliffe, who runs INEOS. So we're going to talk to the man who runs Quadrilla now, because in October, soon after fracking had been halted for the first time, Quadrilla's chief executive told us they had no plans to ask for the regulations to be changed. So I asked him earlier, what's changed now?
Well, we did, and we had a letter, as you and your viewers probably know, from the Energy Minister saying there was no plans to change it. So we carried on. We completed our work on the Preston New Road well within the existing regulations. And now what has changed is we have acquired the most comprehensive data set ever acquired on a shale gas well in relation to microseismicity. And we're asking for that data to be taken into account and reviewed, because the fact is the gas is flowing. It looks very encouraging, very promising, could be very big for Lancashire in the UK. But our view on the back of the data is it's highly unlikely to be commercial within the current exceedingly conservative constraints. Was
the shale gas industry consulted when those limits were set for the traffic light system?
Yes, the limits were set back in 2012.
So you were consulted. Sorry, just to be clear, you were consulted.
Oh, we were involved. So we're not pretending that we didn't know what we were getting into.
So now you want to move the goalposts?
Well, as I was about to say, when they were put in place, the then Secretary of State, Ed Davey, was very clear that they had been intentionally set at a very conservative level. They could be reviewed on the back of data, and it was entirely possible they could be raised.
But you'll see where opponents will point out that you've done it, you did it within the regulations that were set. You can't now make any money from it, is what you're saying. So you want the goalposts moved in order to enable you to do that?
Well, I think, you know, it's not just a case of we can't make any money out of it. Our view is that nobody,
that's true,
not just us or anybody else, this is not entirely for Quadrilla's benefit. Clearly, we're a commercial organisation. If we don't make money, we won't succeed. But if we don't extract this gas, the UK will continue to need and use gas, and we're just going to import more and more of it, US shale from the United States. That doesn't make environmental or economic sense.
How much are you talking about? What does it mean? Quantify it. To heat the whole country for a year, 2 years, 10 years? What is it?
We've said that there are over 200 trillion cubic feet of gas in the ground, just in Lancashire licence area alone. Total UK demand is only 3 trillion cubic feet, so that's 70 years in the ground. Of course, only a fraction of that will come out. We've said up to between probably 5 and 10%. But the initial flow results are highly encouraging.
Francis Egan from Quadrilla, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Now, the Oil and Gas Authority has said it has no plans to review its fracking restrictions. It comes after the UK firm Quadrilla called for the earth tremor limit to be reconsidered. Drilling must be stopped at the moment if it causes seismic activity above a magnitude 0.5. That's a regulation which has forced the company to suspend their fracking on a number of occasions. Chief Executive of Quadrilla, Francis Egan, spoke to Sky News a bit earlier.
Not just the fact that we have to suspend for 18 hours. The bigger issue is under the current rules, it's not possible to inject sand into the shale. And without a sufficient quantity of sand in the shale, gas won't flow out in commercial quantities. So that's the critical issue here. We haven't suggested an actual number. What we've done is gather a huge amount of data. We've gathered 40,000 separate data points on this microseismicity, and we are now providing that to the regulators in the UK, and we're requesting an expert review. We're not presupposing the outcome of that review.
Our correspondent Tom Parmenter is at Cuadrilla's fracking site in Lancashire. Tom, long running, as we can see behind you, protests against what Cuadrilla are doing. How has today's statement affected that?
Well, the protests will just continue. They are determined to make themselves heard and to not go away whatsoever. The fight is very much dug in, given particularly what Cuadrilla said today, that this is a viable prospect. There's a great resource beneath our feet, 7,000 feet down. But at the heart of this, as we reflected there, is this one placard behind us, "The Earth has spoken." And just how loudly the Earth has spoken, of course, is the big issue. There's been a whole series of mini tremors over the last couple of years that have obviously alarmed people living in this part of Lancashire and further afield. But it is the level of those tremors that is deemed acceptable by the Oil and Gas Authority. 0.5 on the Richter scale is the current limit. As we saw there, Cuadrilla are keen for those limits to be relaxed. They say they are too conservative, but campaigners such as Barbara Fish, who we spoke to earlier, say, look, this cannot be allowed to happen.
It's nothing new. We've known for a while that Cuadrilla have wanted the limit raised. They've been down to government and they've asked Claire Perry to raise the limit, and she's come out and said no. You agreed to this limit, and that is the limit you must work in. As soon as Cuadrilla started to frack, it became obvious that they were incapable of fracking within that seismic limit.
Cuadrilla have paused operations here in Lancashire. They've moved a lot of their kit off-site until they know what will happen next. They say they are committed, and their investors are committed to fracking in the UK, and they say that fracking as an energy resource for the UK, a major contributor, they say it could be, is within grasp. But we heard from the likes of Greenpeace today, who said, look, the government needs to stop wasting time on fracking and fossil fuels and properly invest and embrace renewable energy.
Tom, thank you.
This afternoon at the Lancashire fracking site, tensions remain high.
There's no damage there. I'm doing that for his children. I'm doing that for his children.
Imposed on local people over the heads of their planners and their councils, fracking is and will likely remain divisive and controversial. Across the autumn and winter, it's been stop, start, stop again for Cuadrilla, the fracking firm in Lancashire. That's because fracking has triggered more than 30 earthquakes, several big enough to be felt at the surface. If they cause a tremor of more than 1.5 magnitude, that's red under the regulatory traffic light system. Fracking must stop then for at least 18 hours. Today, Cuadrilla and the other would-be frackers in England, INEOS, asked the government to review the earthquake monitoring system urgently to allow larger tremors before fracking has to stop.
They're now trying to make it so that earthquakes could be at a much, much greater level than they are now. They really need to realise that fracking is going nowhere. If they can't get gas out of the ground safely, they shouldn't be doing it at all, because it's a real risk for the local environment, for local communities and for the climate as well.
Cuadrilla declined to be interviewed, but insists the earthquake safety system is too stringent. INEOS goes further, claiming you can't have a fracking industry with what they see as an overcautious safety regime. Just a few hours after Cuadrilla's demand, the OGA, the gas regulator, appeared to slap the frackers down, saying there are no plans to review the earthquake safety rules. Just across the North Sea, the biggest gas field in Europe is, right now, being shut down in Holland because gas extraction has caused thousands of damaging small earthquakes, even though the geology is different and the extraction method is also different. Fracking is effectively banned in many European countries, including Scotland. The problem is the emerging pattern which appears now to show that small tremors in the Lancashire site are leading to larger ones.
Nothing's changed since that limit was set in 2011. The industry all agreed to that at the time. The industry have not debated that limit in between. The only thing that's changed is Cuadrilla have gone back into Lancashire in November and December and found that they're having a lot of trouble working to that limit.
So you get it, protesters not the only fracking confrontation in town now. The fracking companies themselves bringing the row over safety limits to a head with the government. A government sympathetic to fracking, whatever local people, local planners or local councils might want. So today's no might be tomorrow's maybe.
There's been no fracking at all at this site today, but just the suggestion that regulations should be relaxed, and the tempers boil over again.
I'm doing that for his children. I'm doing that for his children.
The reason? Cuadrilla, the company operating in Lancashire since October, wants to obtain more of what it calls the rich reservoir below. Fracking involves pumping water, sand and chemicals underground at pressure to fracture the rock and release natural gas. But it can trigger earthquakes. Under the current rules, drilling must stop if the tremors exceed 0.5 on the Richter scale. Cuadrilla argues that with the limit in Canada being 4 and the US 4.5, it should be raised here, otherwise it can't make enough money.
From the data that we've gathered, and we have the most extensive data set in the country, it's highly unlikely to be commercially viable. And what that means is the gas is unlikely to be developed, and we'll continue to import more and more of our gas from the United States, North Africa, Russia.
Work has stopped repeatedly after environmental limits were breached, so Cuadrilla wants authorities to review the rules. Protesters say, no way.
Firstly, Cuadrilla were party to setting those limits in the first place, and it's only recently they've decided they can't work within those parameters. And secondly, why should the government cave into industrial pressure? That is there to reassure the community that we have gold standard regulation.
The government said today that they have no plans for the rules to be changed, but the fears here continue, and so will the fight. Richard Pallow, News at 10.
Controversial plans to dramatically expand production at an oil well near Gatwick Airport have gone out to public consultation. Tests have been carried out at Horse Hill over the past 3 years, and the company involved, UK Oil and Gas, has already extracted nearly 30,000 barrels of oil.
But now it wants to drill up to 4 new oil wells and extract up to 3,500 barrels a day for the next 20 years. There have already been several protests at the site, and residents are concerned about the environmental impact that increased drilling could have. Here's our environment correspondent, Yvette Austin.
Routine maintenance on the main well at Horse Hill. Initial drilling and testing complete. The plan now is to enter full-scale production, which could last 20 years.
In total, we're almost at about 5 million litres, 29,000 barrels, which is good news. We've had about, 140 odd tankers out to date. So it's been a very successful operation, which is obviously why we're wanting to put this thing into full-time production.
So the plan is to extend the site into this field to make room for tanks that'll store more than 9,000 barrels of oil. There'll also be electricity generators which will be using the gas that's produced on site. But you won't see any new oil wells because they'll be underground and horizontal. Horse Hill is in the Weald Basin, an area thought to be rich in oil. Testing was carried out at 3 different levels, the deepest into Kimmeridge limestone around 900 metres down, another section again into limestone and the shallowest into Portland sandstone above. All 3 were productive, and so horizontal wells will be drilled to make extraction more efficient. But the company has been met with opposition. Protesters worry about leaks, water contamination and even that fracking might take place. Oil tankers on the road are also a concern. Sergio Conti runs a bicycle repair shop.
I had problems opening this little workshop for repairing bicycles. The objection was on environmental grounds, noise and traffic. And it was delayed by almost a year. And all of a sudden, there's this huge industrial development going ahead next door.
We don't use oil to generate electricity. We use it for things that people wear, for their mobile phones, for components, the blades for wind turbines. So I think if people look around, their lives will be a lot miserable without oil.
The company insists it doesn't frack, but more testing for naturally flowing oil across the Weald Basin is planned.
Well, Yvette is at the Horse Hill site for us. Now, Yvette, so what's the next stage then with this development?
Well, it's all routine maintenance at the moment, but the public consultation will go on for another 2 weeks, and then there'll be a full planning application that goes to Surrey County Council for that long-term production. But in the meantime, the company does have permission to drill 2 new test wells. One will be an offshoot of the existing well, if you like, that'll go out horizontally. There'll be another one goes right down next to it and also off horizontally for about 1 kilometre. And the company hopes that by the end of this year, they'll be producing 1,000 barrels a day, and that could mean up to 10 tankers leaving here a day. But the company says that they'll only be tankering it around during weekdays and not at weekends, but that could all increase over the next coming years.
OK, Yvette, thank you.